Hello there, welcome to this video. I recently got an email from Reverend Dayglow, who is, you won't believe it, but it's Reverend Dayglow from the, what is it from? Reverend Dayglow from the, I should remember this, from the Infrarednecks. I don't know who this is, but he said he'd be happy if I mentioned them on the channel. So I'm going to mention them again just to make him happy, because I like to make people happy. So Reverend Dayglow from the Infrarednecks messaged me with a suggestion for a video. Now, normally I get a lot of suggestions for videos, and I never do them because they're always rubbish. But this one piqued my interest, and it was to react to these two guys here. Now, they have a YouTube called Your Favourite Band Sucks podcast. Now, that sounds right up my street. And here they're going to be talking about Frank Zappa. And of course, I absolutely love Frank Zappa. And so I thought it would be nice to react and see what they say. Now, as you know, I'm all up for a little bit of ribbing. You know, I don't mind Frank Zappa having the mickey taken out of him. There's no problem with that. You know, these big legendary musicians, you know, especially when they're dead, it won't hurt them to have a bit of fun poked at them. So I'm hoping that this will be funny. And of course, we want a few. I mean, you can't get away with this unless there's a pearl of wisdom in there, a little pearl of truth. So let's see if they can do that, or if it is just, you know, banter for the banter's sake. Now, you've got these two guys. Don't know anything about them. I'm reacting as we go. I watched a little bit of this just to check that it was, you know, the sort of thing I could react to. And what I'm seeing is straight away, they got this sort of lo-fi 80s, video camera look, which I quite like. Shall we kick in and hit play? So their video, it's all very postmodern, and they get themselves ready.
Put your beer again.
The tracking's not so good on this. Look, remember the tracking. Remember tracking.
That you come over here. It's all on me. It isn't beer. Frank Zappa's whole career is like, yo, have you heard of vaginas? Yeah, what about buttholes?
So yeah, I mean, straight off, they've sort of come in with their position, which they're going to go to the offence. You know, they're going to say he's very offensive, and he talks about, you know, rude things and childish things. And that's I assume that with the fact it's all very complex. So what we're going to get is it's too musically sophisticated for them, and they're very offended by all the bad words, right? Which these guys look like the sort that would get offended by that, don't they? I'm sure it's, you know, they're very upright young gentlemen who don't like to hear some potty mouth, especially in the when it's Frank Zappa's potty mouth.
And then he touched his butthole. The one department I will give it to Frank Zappa in is the facial hair department. Easily one of the sickest mustaches of all time.
And of course, he won. Frank Zappa won my greatest prom mustaches video.
You probably never would have heard of him.
Yeah, we wouldn't even be doing this episode. But real quick, before we officially get started, a lot of people, when they listen to our podcast, are like, oh, I've never heard of this person, right? So that's like one of the most common things. Literally do like Led Zeppelin or something like that, and we'll get some comment, I've never even listened to Led Zeppelin. It's like, okay, well, that's really weird, but okay.
Get on with it.
I'm just going to tell you right now, if you've never heard of Frank Zappa, let's just do yourself a favor. You don't need to listen to Frank Zappa. You're just going to have to take our word for it that it's fucking terrible. Appreciate never listening to Frank Zappa if you've never listened to it.
You'll have a really good time not
Your
listening
life will
to Frank
be
Zappa.
better, I promise.
In 1983, 84, I think it was 84, my friend rang up, he bought Them or Us by Frank Zappa, and he actually rang me up and said, you have to come over and listen to this album, you will not believe it. And I walked across the town, took me about an hour to get to my friend's house, and I sat down and I listened to that album, and it changed my life completely. So these guys, by saying don't listen to them, yeah, now they might not have the ears or sensibility to really understand what Zappa's going on about, you see. That might be what's going on here. They're cursory, shallow listen and not really grasping what's going on. There's no problem with that if they want to say that, but to say to other people, don't listen to it, I would say the opposite. If I hate something, I will be saying, go and listen to it. You can tell me what you think, and if you do like it, tell me why you like it, you know. So But they're really
If
flat
you've
out.
never listened to this, so just take our word for it. Everything that's said in this episode is gospel, and don't listen to Frank Zappa.
So I know that Frank Zappa fans are going to press play on this episode and sit down with a fucking checklist. Or are we going to
Don't need to, mate. It's all up here. All up here.
By name. No.
Wait, like 60 of them or something like that?
Over 60 for
72
sure.
It's like 60.
when he was alive.
It's
Probably up to about
also
100 now.
Situation, so they're still coming out with
What?
stuff. Like, this dude's still coming out with new albums.
no.
It's like, Frank, stop.
Yeah, they
Rest
are.
in peace, literally, please. Frank Zappa's whole thing was basically to record and release as much material as possible, which makes it practically impossible to judge his body of work as a whole.
These are musicians.
Sorry about the adverts. Modern world.
Does anyone actually look like this when they play music?
Zappa's essentially the Grateful Dead for sarcastic assholes, except he and everyone in his bands could always play their instruments, and they all really, really wanted you to know that they could play their instruments. For fans of the Dead, it's all about the huge library of live bootlegs, which is what makes most first-time callers say, wait, I gotta spend how much time listening to all this bullshit before I get it? I'm good. You're gonna just not. Kind of the same thing with Zappa, only it's this massive stack of what appear to be studio albums, except a lot, probably even most of those albums were actually recorded live. Because at a certain point, this dude figured out that recording his concerts cost way less money than all the expenses of recording in a studio.
Well, and, it also makes it...
I'm letting them dig their own hole, don't worry.
Oh, well, we were playing live.
So that's the other thing about this guy. Everyone always talked about he's basically Hitler of music as far as what he expected of his band and the amount of mistakes that he would tolerate, which were not very many. Like if you made several mistakes, you were getting fired, no question. Would rehearse people like they were training for the Olympics or some shit. A lot of the conversation around this has always sort of taken it for granted that happened because he was a perfectionist and so demanding. No, it's because he was trying to get these people in shape to where he could make albums live and not pay studio musicians way more money than you have to pay touring musicians.
Yeah.
Right. All of this is completely incorrect, and I don't know where to start with this. All his albums aren't studio albums. So if we say we get work from, say, about 1980, Tinseltown Rebellion is a live album. There's 2 studio tracks on it, and they're completely in the studio, except for Easy Meat, which is half studio, half live. You Are What You is in the recording studio. I think there could be some elements in there. If we look at Ship to Late Saving Drowning, which side 1 is studio, side 2 is live. Now, so when you look at one of the albums, Them or Us completely studio, and I'm just taking a certain part of Zappa's career, Man from Utopia. There's a couple of live when they do the Justice Charge Party hats, so the rest is in the studio. So it's not the case that he's passing off live albums of studio albums. When he does a live album, it's a live album. When he does a studio album, it has elements of live performance in, but they are heavily overdubbed. And so the musicians are working on the studio stuff and they're working on the live stuff. And Zappa did stuff in that context that no one had ever done before, which have now become common practice. So, for example, he would take guitar solos that he'd done live, then he'd put musicians in the studio and he would get them to improvise along with the live solo on the spot. It was a thing called xenochrony that is actually seemed so bonkers at the time, but of course if anyone uses samples and you lay a sample against something else and they weren't supposed to be aligned, but you've made them aligned, this really was groundbreaking. Now the big thing that's here, which really is not right, is Zappa's musicians were paid a wage. They got paid, and it was a good wage. As Steve Vai talks about when he joined the band, he came on as just a copyist and he was put on a wage to do this. And then when he joined the band, and it was really, really good money. So whether they were working live or in the studio, they were going to get paid anyway. Also, it has to be said that I would say, the 80s on, which is when he was recording, once he had the portable recording equipment to record every single show, which he did, he also had his own studio. So there was no studio costs. The reason why he recorded the gigs is not because he wanted perfection and to do this on the cheap. In fact, Zappa ploughed, especially into the classical stuff, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, to make these albums happen. And where this comes from is right in the early days when he had to he couldn't afford to run the Mothers. He had to stop the Mothers, and they were having to try and survive on not much money. And some of those got fed up with that and moaned about it, and they saw themselves as being part of a band, because the Mothers was a band, which made Zappa decided, right, I will now be Frank Zappa, and I will hire people and I will pay them. The other thing about him being Hitler, I have interviewed on my channel Ralph Humphrey, I have interviewed John LaPonte, and I have interviewed Simon Phillips, all who worked with Frank Zappa, and they didn't say they was Hitler. What they said was he would push you past what you could do, and he would do that for all the people in the band, and they were grateful that he did that because he actually improved their ability. None of them ever reported to me any Hitler-like behaviour, and if you made a mistake, right, that you got sacked, this isn't the case. In his band, he would have people who were specialists. So someone like Adrian Belew joined the band and couldn't read music, right? But he had a place in the band, and his expectations were specific to Adrian Belew. In this respect, he was very much like Duke Ellington in that he had a band and he worked to the strengths of those bands, not some autocrat that was telling people what to do. He would push people, but this, all of that, it's like this, what they're poking at is absolutely untrue. It doesn't make sense. It's not funny because it doesn't. If you know about Frank Zappa, none of he's going, this isn't right. You know, he's not saying something. I know I could come out with Zappa's bad points. I could do this brilliantly, but they straight off have gone to the wrong thing.
Yeah. Not have to pay for engineers, renting the studio at all. He was getting paid by the venue to make albums. So he was cracking the whip on these people to make sure that they were in a condition to where on one stop of the tour, they would hand in a technically perfect performance.
It's just not true. Not true. And also, it's got to be said, when you listen to these tracks, he was editing different performances together, and not to get perfection. Zappa was never about perfection. Right, there's inaccuracies in everything he does, and he was quite aware of that. And he was able to take those inaccuracies and utilise those as part of the composition. A lot of the reason why he was recording gigs was not to get this, right? These guys don't know about music, right? That's the bottom line. They don't know. He was doing it to capture improvisation. Improvisation that's really hard to do in the studio, because improvisation is different when you're doing it for an audience in front of you. This is really ignorant stuff at the moment. And if I haven't got a problem with that, if it was funny. I mean, this isn't funny. This is just saying stuff that's not true about Frank Zappa.
That he had written.
Bullshit. Yeah, it reminds me of, I don't like jazz music at all. Like, I've had people throughout the years be like, oh, you don't like jazz because you haven't listened to blah. No, I've listened to that. I've listened to that. I don't like jazz. I realize, to the untrained ear, if you're listening to jazz, it sounds like it's just kind of like chaos. But it's not. It's for a purpose. I get that. Jazz is not random. It's on purpose, you motherfuckers.
It doesn't sound like farts.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't sound like farts, dude. But Zappa...
The only humour that they're getting out of this is being like Frank Zappa, or their idea. In other words, just saying farts and swearing a lot. That is the humour. Right, because there's nothing else here. That's the entertainment value of this. And I'm sure as this carries on, they are going to criticise Zappa for doing exactly the same thing that they're doing, and not understanding the fact that they're sat there doing this, the fact that this exists, this sort of entertainment exists, that what I do and what they do actually has its roots in part with some of the incredible innovations that Frank Zappa made. You know, so when you go back to the first album, or Lumpy Gravy, for example, and you have those people talking inside the piano, and he uses that as a cultural critique, it's very similar to what we have here. It's that postmodernist idea of 15 minutes of fame, you know. Anyway, let's carry on.
It's like, to me, and it's impossible to, I guess, really know, because in a studio recording, you're going to have like the best possible polished product. In a live recording, there's going to be even subtle mistakes, but if you can always say,
not about
that's just
mistakes,
the way it was supposed to sound, i.e. jazz, no, it was supposed to be that way. You could just forever hide behind that. It's kind of like a cop-out, in my opinion.
Well, also, studios are rooms that are built to record music in. Concerts are rooms that are designed to sell people beer in.
Yeah.
And yeah, maybe it should sound good to people who are full of fucking beer, but if you go listen to these albums, the ones that were recorded live, the production is terrible. You can, it's not recorded the way that professional music is supposed to be recorded.
Now you start to wonder whether what they've listened to. If they've got to checked out something like live at the Fillmore or just other bands from LA, this sounds like that's the bit they've gone for. I don't think those albums are very good. They're live albums though, and every single band in the 70s when they put a live album, that's what they sounded like. But when you put something like the Roxy and Elsewhere on, which is a live album, or you put Zappa in New York, the recording quality is incredible. Frank Zappa is a rare musician that in the early 60s, he owned a recording studio. By the time he got a deal in 1966, he was beyond a Brian Wilson. He was beyond the Beatles. You know, they had George Martin, of course. But the point is that Zappa from day one understood the studio inside out. And he was rigorous. His albums are stunning. They're stunning. All of them at every single level. And he is pushing the studio to the max. The idea that Overnight Sensation or Uncle Me or Hot Rats or Shake Your Booty or Them or Us or any album does not sound stunning. In fact, when he went out and toured in 88, and he took out this huge band with the horn sections, there was a lot of improvisation going on. And I can remember reading a review in Wire that said never have musicians at this jazz ability been recorded in such a setting. In other words, in front of huge audience and high quality hi-fi recording. And it was interesting to hear the musicians in that context. This is absolutely inaccurate, right? Zappa got the performances he wanted. They are not scrappy. They're not the worst for being live. He's meticulous in the way he edits them together. It's innovative in what he's doing. They do not understand what Zappa is doing creatively. They cannot like it, but you cannot turn around and say stuff that's not true. You can't. Okay?
It actually sounds like shit.
No, it doesn't. What album?
Bad. To the point where you're like, I know this was like, what, the 70s? I get it. It's not going to sound amazing, but there are plenty of bands that you can listen to from the 70s that have like really amazing sound. And this ain't it. It was recorded live in an auditorium with a bunch of people chugging Budweisers.
Other thing about Zappa, there are kind of a few different phases in his career. You've got the first several Mothers albums. You've got him basically going solo after that, even though it was sometimes still called The Mothers. And that's when most of his albums were basically about being a horny weirdo creep with still some pop culture is bad stuff mixed in every now and then. And then he fell in love with this device, an early digital synthesizer called a synclavier that could play whatever he wrote.
Now, of course, they're not going to get the synclavier stuff and they're going to say it was terrible. They're going to say, I imagine things like he was really happy because he didn't have to pay musicians and the synclavier was always perfect. All the usual stuff that we expect to get from here. But the point is, these guys don't know. They haven't listened to the albums. That is why they are saying that those early 70s albums, like the Grand Wazoo, and I mean, I'll have to go all through these albums, go and listen to the production on them, and then go and compare them to many other 70s albums at the time. Zappa was being hired as producer for other bands at that point. He was producing people like Grand Funk Railroad because he was such a brilliant guy in the studio. This is nuts. It's just simply not true. Now, what I'm spotting underneath this is they can't name anything. There's no particular tracks. They're not naming albums, right? And this guy has just done a part in history. So they've read up on what he's done. They've said there was the Mothers of Invention, which is the case. And then he disbanded the Mothers and we got the Flo and Eddie band. And that was where you get a lot of this sort of misogynist stuff. And I'm not so keen on that. But then he goes into a period of making instrumental albums, like Grand Wazoo, Waka Jawak and all that. And then he forms the Funky band with George Duke, right, that. And then he has his record company thing, gets out of his record company. He comes back in, he does orchestral phase Fitz, he starts working with orchestras, all this type of stuff. And there's a whole history going through. He has a hit record with Ship Too Late to Save a Drowning, which he does all these things. But they have literally gone from 1971 to 1985 when he gets to Synclavier. And they've missed out what's going in the middle. And the reason is because when he read Wikipedia, that one there, he read it and went, oh, I can't be arsed anymore. Right? So what we're getting is a second-hand version of them reading Wikipedia and trotting out little bits. If you don't know, and I've done this where I've got an artist I don't particularly like, and I've criticised them, but let the audience know, let the audience in on the joke that you have never actually listened to Frank Zappa and you don't know anything about them. And then your audience can come back at you. And what I find is a decent thing to do, which I happened with The Clash, with London Calling, which people said you've only listened to it once. Well, I'd actually listened to it twice, bought the album, listened to it twice, never listened to it again. So I went back and listened to it again, and I had listened to it with an open mind. This is the fun thing about music, right? So it's let's see where we go with this.
And he didn't even have to be mean to it, like he had to be to his musicians. So he then made a bunch of albums with this fucking thing, like Jazz from Hell is one of them. And if you think that sounds like an interesting concept, I would encourage you to go press play on any song on that album, because it sounds like total ass, the worst daytime public TV educational programming background music you have ever heard. Yeah, he just loves this thing.
It's like they're getting the wrong end of the stick. So Jazz from Hell, anybody who thinks it's like sort of Muzak TV theme stuff, go and listen to it. Go and listen to While You Art and listen to that and say, oh yeah, because I would love to see the TV show that's got that on it. That's the first thing. Second thing, it opens up with a track which I think is called something like Nighttime or something like that. Can't remember the title, but it was written to parody like TV themes. That's the very first track. None of the rest of it do it. G-Spot Tornado is just this blur of like visceral, insane stuff spinning out all over the place. And then on top of that, you can't drop on every single track, because Sentetian is a live recording of doing one of the most beautiful guitar solos in rock history. So not everyone is, and it shows that he has gone, he doesn't know the other. I'd love to be there. Say, well, name the other albums that use the Synclavier on. You could see he's gone, I'll have a listen to Mothers, I'll have listen to Flo and Eddie, they've listened to a couple of tracks. I'm a YouTuber, I know how people prepare for this, right? But what you have to do is you have to let people in on the joke. You have to let them know, if you criticise something, that it's you that's the idiot, not the audience, because you don't like it, and you can say what you think, but in the end, you're a bigot. That is how I try and do it. Now, if there's a kernel of truth, and you hope there's a kernel of truth, the audience will go, well, yes, you're right about Van Morrison. He is a little ugly fat goblin. And he is, and if they were saying, think of Frank Zappa, he's got a huge nose, like that YouTuber Andy Edwards, a huge, great big nose. No wonder he had to put that moustache on it. That's fine, right? And if they wanted to say, which is the criticism of Frank Zappa that is relevant, that he put his music in front of his family. Moon Unit's come out with this book criticising him, and he was too interested in chasing groupies. That is his big downfall. And that often is where the uncomfortable misogynist bit thing happens with Zappa. But there is an argument of how to approach that, and I'm sure when they get to that, I will bring that argument out. But these guys just don't know about him. That's the problem.
A lot, certainly, of the last part of his career just pumping out bullshit with this thing. It was kind of like how Prince got married to that production sound in the...
Right, and the other thing is, they've talked about Grateful Dead. What's the Grateful Dead got to do with it? It's now talking about Prince. They're talking about people they know, because they can't talk about Frank Zappa. Frank Zappa did Jazz from Hell, and then he did Francesco Zappa, which was... These are all coming out in the same year. So it's not like with Zappa you wait for one album to come out. In a year, he might just put 5 or 6 albums. But at the same time, after that, we get that huge amount of albums released that were coming out of the 88 tour. You can't do that on stage anymore. Broadway the Hard Way, The Yellow Shark. There was so much coming out that wasn't Synclavier stuff. He didn't push this out. And us that were interested in his compositional approach were interested in it at the time, and they don't seem to understand the context of this. No one had done this before. When I bought Jazz from Hell, I put it on, and I was like, This is supposedly done with computers, and we could hear drums and stuff. And now we can hear the sound. But back then, me and my mate were going, how have they done this? Are there drums on this? Or is the computer somehow play the drum kit? Or what is this? Because we didn't understand it. He was pushing new ground. The synclavier was like something like £1 million or something. Probably not that much, but it was a lot of money. And you needed to be close to someone who could look after the synclavier. So this is the only chance you got to hear somebody making music that was entirely created on computer. Now, they say he pushed it out. Well, I'm afraid, mate, if you go and turn the radio on, every single record that you're hearing has been made in that way. And Zappa at the time was making music on computers, and if you read his autobiography, he said in the future you'll be able to get a track down your phone line, right? And I can remember reading this thinking, what is he on about? And of course, he's predicting the whole thing. And he had a visionary aspect to him that actually went through the whole of the music industry. And although he was a cult figure, musicians listened to him. And because musicians listened to him, because he was continually pushing the envelope, he had an influence. And that goes from 1966, when he does Freak Out. And what happens on Freak Out is way beyond anything the Beatles were doing, or Brian Wilson, or Bob Dylan, or any of them. And they heard it and they responded to it.
80s and then just plowed right into the 90s and 2000s without updating anything about it.
Talking about Prince.
This sounds like complete trash. You realize that, right?
Prince might sound like complete trash. He means does it like, you know, but
you're welcome to upgrade.
talk about Zappa.
It doesn't even matter what you write. Whatever music you have this thing play, it's gonna sound terrible.
It's samples. It sounds like what you sampled.
Objectively sounds so awful. I don't think we really need to spend any time on that.
Because you got nothing more to say because you're at your
Other
depth.
parts of his career, because for some reason there are still way too many dudes who think Frank Zappa matters way more than he really does. And by way too many dudes, I mean about 5,000 guys, probably. I don't believe there were ever nearly as many people paying attention to this as you would think from how high one of those early Mothers albums or Hot Rats will always be placed on any Rolling Stone magazine best album ever list. You would think that Frank Zappa was one of the most influential musicians ever.
See?
The way that he is discussed.
I knew it.
If you go look up the album sales, it's never been really anything to speak of.
I know. When I actually watched one of his videos, like his live thing, I was blown away by how many people were even there to see him play.
A couple hundred.
I was like, what the fuck?
Starting at the beginning.
Right. There's an error there. There's an actual error, because this guy here, the quieter one, he said he saw a video. And of course, Zappa's playing. When I saw Zappa in '88, it was at the NEC in Birmingham, and that is a 12,000 seater venue. It's pretty much full. He's played to 12,000 people. He did 3 gigs in the UK like that. He was playing to about 30 or 40,000 people. He would regularly play to about 10,000 people. If you watch any of the shows, that's the size of the audience. That guy's actually watched some videos, but this guy decides to assume that he plays to audiences of 200 people, and that is not the case, unless he's done a bit of research and just looked at the early Mothers and looked at the sort of New York gigs that they used to do. They do not know. And when I saw Zappa in '88, it wasn't dudes. And even if it was dudes, why does that matter? Right, this whole thing that because dudes are watching something, it somehow makes it worse. That's a criticism. It's precisely why we need Frank Zappa now, because he would be able to burst this crap. Right, he would be able to burst it and show it up for what it is. Now, they're going to think that all the offensive stuff is just trite and silly and childish, but it's not childish, because there's a cultural critique there that points, when he's having a go at something, Zappa often, not always, and he did go wrong, and sometimes I don't agree with it, but often he's pointing a finger at something that doesn't like to be prodded at. That's the whole thing here. And this idea that he could just go dudes, and the fact that he says that with an exaggerated, expression, somehow is a criticism. I don't understand it, especially when this is so confused. So what is it? Are you surprised that they played to thousands, or are you just go, oh yeah, only 200 people liked him? He made 70 albums when he was alive. things like Shaky Booty sold 1 million copies. The really esoteric ones sold about 10, 20,000 copies. If we average that out at around about 100,000 copies, you put it across 70 albums, he's outselling a lot of bands that we would think that are bigger than Frank Zappa. And the proof of this is he was able to create his own label, sustain his own label, pay his musicians, because he was understood how the music industry worked, and he was able to create exactly the music he wanted without any compromise within the system. These are things, even if you hate the music, you have to turn around and go, well, I've got to respect that.
Those early Mothers albums, talking Freak Out, Absolutely Free, and We're Only in It for the Money. It is music made by a guy who, if he had the choice, would not be making this kind of music. Zappa essentially did not enjoy rock music. He definitely didn't like psychedelic music, but he was forced towards some semblance of those musical forms because that's what was popular at the time. And this dude clearly and deeply needed to be paid attention to. We're talking pathological levels of everyone look at me. On the point of him not liking rock music, this is a guy whose favorite Black Sabbath song was Iron Man. Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Come on, there's some Zappa fans out there, isn't there? Do I even have to answer this one? What was Frank Zappa's favourite Black Sabbath tune? Was it Iron Man? And if it was Iron Man, how would this be proof that he doesn't like rock music? I love Iron Man. It's pretty rock to me. There's nothing wrong with that. But the problem is, he never said that his favourite Black Sabbath tune was Iron Man. His favourite Black Sabbath tune was Supernaut. Now, in 1973-74, Led Zeppelin rocked up to the studio, and there is the legendary jam that Led Zeppelin had with Black Sabbath. And when they arrived, John Bonham, who I think did like rock music, said, my favourite tune by you guys, Black Sabbath, is Supernaut. Can we jam on Supernaut? Right, my favourite tune by Black Sabbath is Supernaut. Right, and the reason that Zappa liked Supernaut and liked Black Sabbath is because he liked rock music. One of the things people don't understand is when Zappa quotes something musically, if he quotes Stravinsky or Louie Louie or reggae or a Led Zeppelin riff, it's because he likes it, not because he hates it. Because the way Zappa works is like he's like Kurt Schwitters, in that he takes all these different elements and he puts them all together, right? But in his music, he enjoys playing certain things and he brings them in. He grew up listening to rhythm and blues bands, Johnny Guitar Watson and Guitar Slim, right? And now the thing is, I think what they're moving towards now would be the whole they're trying to argue that Frank Zappa sort of sold out, that he was making records for the hippies when he wasn't a hippie, that he didn't take drugs. That going to be that narrative? You see, the thing is people who don't really know about Zappa, and why don't they like Zappa? Because it's complex and it requires concentration, because the music is really dense. And that requires focus, and that is difficult. Sometimes I find it really difficult. There's certain compositions that I can get something out, but I have to really, really focus, and I'm a trained musician. Yeah, it's musician's music. If you don't want to listen to that, go listen to AC/DC or something, because that's a different thing. Zappa doesn't do that, but sometimes he does rock. And when Zappa chooses to create a rock riff, you know, like I'm the Slime or Dirty Love or any of those types of things, or Stevie Spanking, he understands it exactly. This guy was a guitar hero. It's like they don't understand.
It did not like rock music unless
No.
there was heavy amounts of kitsch involved. That is the worst Black Sabbath song, easily.
He wanted to be a classical composer, right? Like that was his thing.
From the beginning, yeah.
When he was a kid.
And that didn't work out, so he was like, shit, how do I get people to pay attention to me? And if you don't think that this guy needed people to pay attention to him, there was this like publicity stunt bullshit that he pulled. I want to say it was after the first album, Freak Out. Maybe not, I don't remember. But there's the character that he came up with, Susie Cream Cheese, for the album. And he wrote a letter, like a letter to the editor, into some local San Francisco or LA music zine as Susie Cream Cheese, pretending to be Susie Cream Cheese like she was a real person. And y'all should go find this letter if you've ever taken this guy seriously. The whole point of the letter is how people need to be paying attention to what the mothers are seriously saying, because if you really paid attention, then there's a message there. It's just like, dude, you're taking yourself way too seriously, and you're trying to astroturf some fucking cult of people who also take you way too seriously. Weird.
What did bands of what else?
Now, of course, I know about Susie Creamcheese. I don't actually know about this story, and I should go and check that out because I've never heard that story before about him writing a letter. It does sound like something that Frank Zappa would do. I've got to be honest. I can imagine him doing that. And this, well, yeah, maybe he said right in the early days that his band was like really, really good and they got this special message and they're really great. Now, I'd counter that by saying, can you think of any other bands that may have, when they first formed, written a press release where they pretended to be, they talked in this third person, pretended to be someone else and said, this band is really great, they're making new ground and doing this. Everybody does that in the early days. I mean, what is the issue, right? Zappa, when he was a kid, did not want to be a classical composer because classical music is a period that sort of starts in Beethoven and runs up through that Mozart. It's that period of music. He wanted to be a modern classical musician. He was into Varese, okay? That was his big guy. But he was also into a whole bunch of other things. And one of the things that Zappa covers up, and I've covered it on my channel, he was into jazz. And his early recordings are quite straight instrumental. He was a composer. He was not someone who was going to make social critique. He got a Studio Z, and then somebody tried to entrap him by asking him to make a pornographic film. And he didn't. What he did was made a pretend audio tape. And on this, the local sort of powers that be imprisoned Frank Zappa for this. And that experience changes him. And this is why you see that this is someone who wants to be a composer, they're interested in music, and then they have this traumatic experience of being falsely imprisoned. And when you put on Freak Out and you hear the chrome-plated megaphone of destiny and you hear that sort of totalitarian thing that he has spotted, it's because Zappa believes in the message of those early albums. And I think at that time, that hippie ideal that seemed to last for about 5 minutes in 1967, he prodded at unapologetically. He wasn't trying to get the hippies involved. He called the album Freaks Out because he was appealing to the freaks and weirdos. The freaks, not the hippies.
I feel like Frank Zappa fans would also like what, Steely Dan or something like that. Like, what is
For fucking
like?
sure.
That's another like.
This guy's got nothing on the left, has he? This one here. It's like, oh, another band that I don't like is Steely Dan. Now, I've taken the mickey at a Steely Dan on this. And I've taken, prodded fun at their studio perfectionism and all that type of thing. But Steely Dan are a great band. And what I wouldn't do is go, the audience like Steely Dan also would probably like some other band that I'm now going to say is no good. This is just awful. You need to come up with something that actually criticises Zappa based upon some facts, because the stuff that this is based on is just not true. It's not an interpretation. These things just aren't true. Any Zappa fan will go, this does not ring true. His albums are well produced. There are mistakes on there. He utilised mistakes in the recordings. He had a history of doing this. He had a history of doing that. He didn't put bang out Synclavier albums. His favourite track by Black Sabbath wasn't Iron Man. All this is just basically untrue.
Snobby, like you don't get it band for some reason, which makes no fucking sense to me. But a bunch of people that take themselves way too serious.
He would say this shit in interviews all the time too. People will call him a rock musician or a rock artist. And he'd be like, I'm not a rock artist, I'm a musician.
Yeah.
It's like, I have talent. He would say that verbatim. I actually have talent. I'm not a rock artist.
I can't think of any interview. He did say he was a musician all the time, but I have never heard Zappa talk like that, say, I have talent and I'm like this. I've never heard that happen at all. Zappa, part of the genius is mixing highbrow with lowbrow. And one of the things people get, and I'm going to defend it because I know they're going there with it. This will be the one at the end of the video. And of course, this video is like an hour long. And with me stopping and starting it, we'll be here for 2 hours. So I can't do the whole lot. I'm going to do it until I feel like I've annihilated them. And then once they're annihilated, we'll stop. Zappa said that when he sings about a Jewish princess or Bobby Brown or Catholic girls and stuff like that, he said he does not sing from an elevated position. He said he sings it from the idea that he's a regular guy and he's driving his car down the road and he sees something and then he stops at a diner and somebody said, what was going on back there? And he goes, you won't believe it, back there, this was going on. And he didn't actually have any moral judgment against the things he threw up. So when the 60s things happened and the rock bands were in full swing, right? And they were going across destroying stuff and all the groupies and all that stuff that was going on, that we are now looking at and going, this looks a bit dodgy, you know, what was going on back then. And that's the thing that's happening now. If you want to know what was actually going on, you go back to the Zappa albums, the worst ones, the Flo and Eddie band, and there, what he is doing, he is documenting what was going on in his band. There was no judgment there. He was going, this is where we're at, this is Western culture, and I am going to show you what Western culture's like by showing you an aspect of something that exists that isn't going to be covered anywhere in the mainstream. So all the other rock bands are going to sing about love, or they're going to sing about, you know, driving out and groupies and stuff like that. They're going to sing about it in that way. Or maybe I come from the land of the ice and sun, you know, with, you know, pretend you're a Viking or whatever it is, or yes, talk, singing nonsense. This is what's going on at the time. Zappa will go, that there is a thing that happens. There are these sausages that you can buy here, right? We bought these sausages. They're like these little burnt weenie sausages, you know. And then these things are all stitched into a great big recording of the culture at the time. So when you put a Zappa album in 1973 and you listen to all the things, and as a kid being British and being not in 1973, he would mention stuff, and I go, I wonder what that is. You'd look it up and you find out, and it would give you a window into an aspect of culture that was going on. He was the only artist that was really doing that in that way. They seem to, obviously they've got a YouTube. To be fair to them, they've got a YouTube and they've got to come out and they've decided to have a go at Frank Zappa. And us Frank Zappa fans do know everything, and we can have this encyclopedic knowledge of all this stuff, and we should have the Mickey taken out of them. I don't think they would have been better off. The bits where they start to go, well, Zappa fans are like this, that's the bit I want to hear more of. I want them to hear them taking the Mickey out of us. And us as Zappologists, we actually have a name for it. The people who will always apologise for Frank Zappa. That's fair enough. Zappa himself, all he did was make records. He put those records out. He did what he wanted to do. He made the music he wanted to make, right? You could like it or not like. That's true of any single artist, even Van Morrison, Bruce Springsteen. I don't have to like it. You don't have to like it. This is only the problem we've got here, and I'm going to keep saying it over and over again, so I'm going to move on, I think, is the fact that none of this is true. It's just not accurate. What they're saying about him is just not true. It's not that I can counter it and say, well, the reason why he did that, the reason why he did that song, and the reason is because there's no real evidence of anything. If they were to go and say, take some, and say they took Penguin in Bondage and say, what the hell's he writing this? You know, someone's having like this weird sexual encounter with a penguin. Why would he want to incorporate this into a song, and what's it about? And then I could counter that and say, well, what he's doing is that he had a bit of a feud with Lou Reed. He saw Lou Reed be that sort of New York pretentious thing, which I do as well. And they did Venus in Furs. And so Zappa takes the Mickey out of it. It's a satire. So as ridiculous as Penguin in Bondage is, it's ridiculous because it's pointing how ridiculous Venus is in Furs is. And then you start going, oh yeah, Venus in Furs. You got a Venus in Furs. That's a goddess in these furs. And you've got a penguin in bondage. You know, and then when you start to listen to it, the thing will start to shape up. And you go, it's not just being offensive. It's not just the Mac lads. For those who live in the UK, Zappa is not just the Mac lads.
He's in the 70s just churned out men that like genuinely believed their own hype. Music would not exist without me. Because the thing is, like, he liked the theater. It's like Weird Al.
I never got this from Frank Zappa at all, ever. And any interview, did I think
it seems more theater than music, highlighted by unserious humor. But then there's like these moments where everyone wants to or he wants it, and everyone wants it to be taken so seriously.
Well, I think it's sort of a weird attempt to combine being way too self-serious with levity, like an attempt to offset that with levity.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. I mean, there's another thing is that when they try and talk about it, it's almost like they're going, this is confusing, isn't it? The music's massively serious and complex and dense and modern classical. There's all these influences in there. And that feels like it needs to be taken seriously. But at the same time, he's doing jokes about farts, which he's not. I can't think of any thing where he's done that. Why is he doing that? That is the point. And so if the question, it's like with modern art, when someone goes, what's the point in that art? It's not even art. And you go, yeah, I know, that's the point. Keep asking the questions. It's making you think. You're surrounded by art. None of it makes you think. And then you come up against Frank Zappa and you are literally going, why has he done this? Why has he done that? You ask yourself the question and follow it through, because that is how high art works. That's the conceptual aspect of high art.
Kind of just doesn't work. But also, talking about him wanting to be a classical musician first, if you look at a list of Zappa's biggest early influences, you can tell pretty much any music he ever made was always going to suck, no matter how technically difficult it was to play. And please fuck off before you type that comment. I don't care how hard this shit is to play.
I don't.
It's such a stupid argument. Aside from Stravinsky and old R&B artists like Little Richard, Zappa almost exclusively
Little Richard
music. He always made a big deal out of being super young the first time he heard the quote-unquote music of this composer named Edgar Varese. And man, I don't know how many of you Zappa fans who cite this as some cool piece of trivia have ever gone and listened to any Edgar Varese, but it's some of the worst trash of all time. Like, even if you're interested in avant-garde composition, Varese is just not the dude compared to guys like Ioannis Xenakis. If you think Varese is it, listen to the Xenakis electronic music compilation or the chamber music compilation, as well as his composition Metastasis. Listen to Harry Parch, Delusion of the Fury by Harry Parch. That is avant-garde music that actually has something to say on a musical front. It's not just doing...
Whoa, I mean, the thing is, right... You can criticise Bruce Springsteen, you can criticise Frank Zappa, but when you start to criticise like a Miles Davis or a John Coltrane or an Edgar Varese, I think you're on shaky ground, because you have to come at it with a sort of authority of what you know, okay? Now, Xenakis and Harry Parch, they're two of the greatest composers of the 20th century. Xenakis and Varese and a few others of that period, this sort of modernist period, how is Varese the rubbish one? Is that what he's trying to say? Is that, oh yeah, you got Xenakis, he was the real deal. You know, he was the real deal. It's like, you know, you got Nirvana, that's Xenakis, but Varese, he's more Nickelback, you know. It's just, right, I have on CD, obviously on Ionization, which I don't think is his favourite piece. My favourite piece by Varese is Amerix. Brilliant piece. I've got a few others. I've listened to him a lot. Xenakis is actually further out than Varese. Varese is a little bit earlier and a little bit not Ionization. Ionization is a difficult piece. I love it. It's like, it's an aesthetic piece that has affected me, you know, through Frank Zappa. But the point is here, they are way out of their depth, and I would be way out of my depth, I think, trying to say that Varese is not a great composer. I mean, I would love to see someone back that up. I would love to see them to pull out something in somewhere that says, oh, they were all really good, those composers, except for Varese.
It's just bullshit for the sake of getting your attention and to try to be funny. But pretentious bullshit is what Frank Zappa liked. So that's what he created and packaged it as if it were the same as all of that drugged out nonsense that was popular in San Francisco at the time. Zappa hated hippies, so what did he do? He made an album that looked exactly like it was made by and for hippies and titled it Freak Out. So who do you think bought that?
Not hippies, no way.
A ton of fucking hippies.
So, you see, and then he says that hippies didn't buy it because they wouldn't have gone for it, and he's right. But the quiet one's right. And then he said they did go for it. And then he goes, of course. They are adding up. They're not working very well together, these two. Freak Out, right, was recorded in 1966. It came out, I think, late 66. Right, it's the same year that Blonde on Blonde came out. It's pre-Sgt. Pepper. the hippie thing hadn't really formed at that point. The Doors had only just got going. This album's ahead of its time. What Zappa looked like and what the band looks like, they were freaks on the front of that album. The whole thing was ahead. They can't seem to see this, how far ahead. The Beatles have acknowledged it. Brian Wilson's acknowledged it. That the fact is that the real bar that was set in 1966 was not, you know, Pet Sounds or any of those. It was Zappa. And on that first album, we see the beginnings of avant-garde rock, indie rock, psychedelic rock, jazz rock, prog, experimental, but psychedelic. It's all actually there. And this idea that Zappa didn't like the psychedelic, I don't think he liked the drug aspect of it. But I think if we were to sit down and go through certain, you know, people that were social, I don't know, maybe he didn't. But the point is, they don't seem to understand the power of these albums, right? They're going to say you're a fan that would say this because I'm an apologist for him. But the point is if you go back, check out what Paul McCartney said about Zappa, right? Let's actually try and nail this, because I do have the internet here. I think the thing that my main problem with this video, I'm going to be honest, is the fact that it's not funny. It's not the fact that they're completely wrong. It's the fact it's not funny. I hope I can find something, or I'm just wasting your time, aren't I? Trouble is, all I'm getting is the stuff about that when he parodied the Beatles. Right, so this is on the Zappa wiki. It's called Wiki Jawaka, which is very funny if you're a Zappa fan. Paul McCartney, born 1942, is a British rock singer and bassist, best known as the member of the Beatles. Paul McCartney cited Freak Out 1966 as a direct influence on the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Later, Zappa parodied the cover of Sgt. Pepper's on We're Only in It for the Money and asked McCartney for permission. McCartney was surprised and told Zappa he should talk to his lawyers. While their lawyers discussed the issue together, it took several months before the album was finally able to come out. In 1980, McCartney made a music video for his song Coming Up. He dressed up as several celebrities, including a saxophonist with long black hair and a moustache. At the time, many people thought that this person was supposed to be Zappa, but McCartney later denied this. Paul McCartney was mentioned and thanked in the liner notes of the Mofo Project Object album by Frank Zappa from 2006. So there, I've really gone through the whole relationship between Paul McCartney and Zappa and shown how Sgt. Pepper, the album that changed culture, is cited as a direct influence from, was directly influenced by Freak Out. These guys do not know what they're talking about.
That's what you get, man. If your whole idea for how to make fun of something is to create a version of it that, at least on the surface, is virtually indistinguishable from the thing you're trying to make fun of, you deserve an audience that you hate.
Do people, which I guess if you're high,
if you sat down and listened to Freak Out and listened to what they're saying in the lyrics, it's not going peace and love and doing all that. He's not doing that. He's not going all you need is love. He's directly criticising it. He's directly critiquing it. Right? He's directly doing that. So I just don't think this is right. I don't think what he's doing is right.
hell and tripping on acid, you could probably go to see Barney live and have a great fucking time. You know, part of it is the cheating of the fact it came out when it did, where the bar was so fucking low.
And people were tripping their dicks off.
Exactly. If people enjoyed the Grateful Dead, yeah, they're gonna enjoy fucking Frank Zappa.
This Grateful Dead thing, when they started up in there, I didn't want to jump in. When they said this about the Grateful Dead, I was like, yeah, that's the Grateful Dead. Zappa's got nothing to do with the Grateful Dead. nothing to do with him. What he does improvisationally is not what the Dead did. It's a different thing. I'm not a huge fan of the Grateful Dead, although in the mid-70s they did some albums I did like. But the type of improvisation that Zappa's doing is different because it's organised from a composition. I mean, what are we gonna? I'm just getting into technical things. I think we've got it. So we just jump forward because we are literally a quarter of the way through this video. So I'm going to go right to the end just to get a flavour.
February 1st.
What's that bloke doing?
Today. In a week, you'll feel better. In 2 weeks,
I ain't going to feel better if I do that.
In a month, your wife won't believe your results.
She won't believe that, no.
It's noticeable. And if you can't tell the difference, it's really sad. Probably led to you having really bad taste in music.
Yes, you've gotten bamboozled many times.
Real fast on the probably not a normal guy / probably a musical genius front, I think that Omar Rodriguez Lopez from Mars Volta, his solo career is basically exactly what I get the impression Frank Zappa fans believe they are experiencing when they listen to Frank Zappa. And I guess I understand being mistaken about that if you've just not heard this stuff. But Omar's albums, Manual Dexterity, Absence Makes the Heart Grow Fungus, A Dice Biston.
He's just making himself sound stupid, you know. He knows Mars Volta. That's pretty out there music. That is his frame of reference, so he's going for that. He doesn't understand Zappa. Right, let me spell this out. Frank Zappa pioneered multi-tracking and overdubbing. He was ahead of the curve of everybody on every single album. He used the studio as an instrument far more than Brian Wilson or even the Beatles did. He was one of the first guitarists to do long-form guitar solos and use improvisation within a rock band. He was the first artist to do what we could say is a rock conceptual double album. Blonde on Blonde had gone before, and it is I will say it's a little bit conceptual, and actually I've said this over and over again, Blonde on Blonde inspired Zappa. Zappa was a Dylan fan. He was the first rock musician to create a composition, like a compositions for sort of rock band, and he did that with his third album Lumpy Gravy back in '67. He's the first person to use effects to change the sound of instruments so they sound like different instruments. So for example, he was using effects like the wah-wah pedal. He gave a wah-wah pedal to Hendrix. That's why Hendrix did, you know, he's right in the centre of culture. Everybody's going for, looking to him. All the rock stars are arriving in Los Angeles and making a beeline to see the guru because of what he's doing, right? He, all the way through his pioneering certain things, he was one of the first people to set up their own label and make that work. He was one of the first people to sign to his own label and then sign his own, run his own band in that way. He was the first person to have that sort of cottage industry. What everyone's doing now is posting their own albums up Bandcamp. Zappa invented that. He was one of the first people to use a computer to create music. He was one of the first people to line stuff that didn't go with each other, which is now modern sampling. He was a pioneer of sampling. I mean, you could just sit there, right? And if you take the actual music out of there, so I don't like the music, you have to accept the fact that what Frank Zappa did in terms of technical innovations, compositional innovations, business innovations, artistic innovations, he's almost untouchable. And I'm glad I took the time to pull that out, and I could go and pull so many musicians, including the guys from Mars Volta and that guy that he mentioned, I can't say his name, Yuma Diodato, wasn't his name? I'm not very good with names. If I was to pull him up and say, what do you think of Frank Zappa? He's going to, of course, say, well, he's the god, he's the don, he's the main man. He's the main man. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for him. For him to bring up this bloke as though he's the real deal is just bonkers. I wish the guy was here to say it. I have never known a creative musician that was any good. Well, I've known a few, but they usually up their own arsehole, being ideologically captured by sort of identity politics and can't take the sexism in Zappa's stuff. But if you take those out, anybody who's a musician who knows what they're talking about will have to really acknowledge Zappa as being one of the great rock musicians, like one of the few genius rock musicians of the 20th century. I think I'm done with this. I'll keep it to the hour. I will keep it to the hour. Shall we just get rid of them? So this was the links in if you want to watch the whole thing. It's a long one. I wish I could sit here and do a 4-hour video and just pull apart every single thing they've said. But up until now, I promise you, I hope that if you go and check, well, I promise you that if you go and check out what I've said and see if the evidence backs it up, you will see they're getting so much wrong. Now, if I was to counter myself, when I did my criticism of The Warning, for example, a lot of people came on and they were very much like, you got this wrong and you got that wrong and you got this wrong. I feel that those are little details, but that's always going to be the argument, is trying to say this is wrong and you got these facts wrong. But when it came to my criticism of The Warning, my central criticism wasn't really affected by me telling the story of who The Warning was. And I got that story wrong in certain places. Well, not, I think it was one place. With this, they're actually saying things that are just categorically wrong. Why? Because they are trying to get some sort of purchase on YouTube. They got around about 17,000 subscribers, which is pretty good. I like their style. I like the sort of lo-fi VHS thing they're doing. I've been told by a couple of people that they are funnier when they're taking the mickey out of other bands. And I think the reason for this is because if they're taking the mickey out of Fleetwood Mac, which is, I haven't watched it, but it's apparently a funny one, I can take the mickey out of Fleetwood Mac because I know things about Fleetwood Mac. We all do. These guys don't know anything about Frank Zappa more than just the surface. They've read about him, they've seen him in pictures, they've heard stories about him. That is what we've got. So when you're dealing with 100 albums and you make the accusation of him doing something, it would be very easy to go, I don't know about that because so-and-so, that rocks. You know, and the biggest thing, the problem I have with these guys is that they're talking about what he said and what he did and all this type of stuff. The vast majority of Zappa albums do not have vocals on. Not vast majority, but a large majority of albums don't have vocals on. You know, Hot Rats, Waka Joe Waka, Grand Wazoo, all 3 volumes of Shut Up and Play Your Guitar, all the orchestral stuff, the Yellow Shark, the Synclavier stuff, Civilization Phase 3. I could just carry on. Orchestral favourites. That so much of the stuff is just a musician making music. And in that respect, he's made more albums like that than some artists that had a whole career and made 20 albums of instrumental music, which wouldn't be under fire. And I always feel if somebody's doing that, you could just have the you could just have the respect to go, I don't like that, but I like this. And I think with Zappa, you have to give him the respect to do that, because he did too much stuff for anybody to turn around and say, I don't like Zappa because of ... If they don't like musically the sound of what he does, if they can't grasp the beautiful compositional thing, this is what moves me so much with Zappa, his incredible ability with melody. He could write a tune. You know, when I listen to something like Oh No, and it's hard for me to sing it, but the melody of that tune is just so beautiful. It's nothing to do with being complex or not complex. It's just beautiful. There's a million jazz fusion musicians and prog musicians that have tried to write complex stuff and it doesn't do anything. Zappa's not like that. So I think this was grossly unfair, to be honest. If I'd have been laughing about it, I wouldn't care what they said, but I wasn't laughing. Maybe other people were laughing. What's your opinion on this? Go and check it out and put your opinion on this. And I'm sure, obviously, they are going to come along and see my sort of criticism of them. If they got upset about it, I would say, as Zappa would have said, take your lumps along with everybody else, because I've just done to you what you've done to Frank Zappa. If you want to come on my channel and chat, and I don't mind doing that. And if that helps you get a few more subscribers, we're more than willing. I approach you with friendship. I've said what I think, but I think as a channel, it's a great idea. I love the idea of the title and what you're doing. If you want to come have a chat about it, that's great. If you want me to come over to yours, that's great. Whatever you want to do, and I'll come and you can have a go at me and we can have a discussion about it. And if you want to get mean, I'll get mean. But if you want to be friendly, I would rather it be friendly. So, you know, if you guys want to come across, I've got no problem with you guys themselves. I don't know you. But, you know, in terms of what you were saying here, you just got too much wrong. And, you know, if you're going to stand up and just say, you know, to try an argument like, and I think this is what did it for me, Frank Zappa's not very good because he didn't know how to rock. The proof that he didn't know how to rock is because he liked a Black Sabbath song. That it doesn't make any sense. And the Black Sabbath song he liked was the rubbish Black Sabbath song, Iron Man. And that proves your argument, right? If all that was the case, it would prove the opposite. But he didn't like Iron Man. And that is just too much of an error for you to sit there. I'd take the video down, guys. You've got to take the video down. Start again. You need to issue an apology to me and Frank Zappa and the Frank Zappa fans, don't you? You can't sit there doing all that like that. Just because you've got your bit in VHS, it looks like you haven't got your tracking done on your video. Sat there with your beer cans, you know, looking like a sort of Beavis and Butthead that's been rediscovered back in the basement. Pontificated about stuff you didn't know. You need to get onto some bands you know about, you know, the sort of bands you like. You know, you need to get back to those types of bands, you know, the ones I mean. Winger. You know, talk about something you know about. This is too beyond you guys, you know. Get a bit of, you know, music history and music theory behind you so you got some reason to have an opinion about stuff. You know, don't just go on and try and talk about stuff that you're out of your depth. You know you're out of your depth. You know, I think you need to have a rethink, really. And this video needs to be taken down, doesn't it? Really. I mean, how many of you guys that are watching my channel here, do you put it in the comments, do you think they need to take that video down or at least go through and, you know, I'll sit with them. I'll tell you what, I'll sit with them and I'll go through the pen and paper, just like they didn't want to happen. Of course, they don't want that to happen, do they? They don't want anyone to actually sit down and go through this and say, that's not true, that's not true, that's inaccurate, that's inaccurate. They don't want anyone to come along and do this. Chaps, take the video down. You're going to have to. I think we call for that video to be taken down. Us Zappa fans are deeply offended by it, and we cannot have our hero besmirched in such a way. Let's rally the call and get that video taken down. Not censor them. They take it down themselves. They realise the error of their ways. They issue apology, and they take the video down. Of course, they won't. What they're going to do is they're going to respond to me in some way. And they might not know my channel, and they might not know what they're messing with. I mean, many other people have tried to do it, haven't they? They have tried to do it. They've tried to do it. They've tried to take me down. You know, I'm always up for the challenge. One day I'll get taken down. I will. I know it. You know, I cannot keep up being the top dog when it comes to this sort of musical critique, cultural critique thing. Like, you know, at the moment it's looking like I am, you know, but you know, I don't really have any fear of these guys, really. Nah, do we? Nah, not here, we don't. Wind them up, wind them up, wind them up. Let's see if they take the bait. Are they going to take the bait? Oh, Andy's saying they're taking the bait. He's whispering now. Why is he whispering at the end of the video? If we say he's so arrogant, is that the trap? Is that a trap that he's laid? Or has he just done that so we can't do it? I don't know where he's coming at. Even before he starts, we don't know where he's going. What game has he played? Why has he even done this? He's got more subscribers than us anyway. So why would he come and look at our video for? Why does he want to do that for? Because I love talking about Frank Zappa. That's why. That's why, chaps. I thought it was an interesting video. You did an interesting video. Inaccurate and wrong, but interesting. And it's better to be interesting than boring. Next time, try and make it funny. If you like this video, like it. If you want to see some more, subscribe. If you want to become a patron, I've got a Patreon down below and you can go and do all that bit. You can support me over on PayPal, YouTube. Go and see those guys and subscribe to their channel because this is a big game. This is a big game. And if I can help them out, right, if I didn't like them, I wouldn't be doing it. If I didn't think that what they were doing was pretty cool, I wouldn't be doing this. Go and subscribe. Go and watch them. Give them some traffic and all that bit. That's what this is really about. And what else before I go? Let's see if I can remember his name. The bloke who emailed me. Thanks for that. I enjoyed that, whatever your name was. What was he called? It was the Doctor Can you remember who you are? I can't. I'm so sorry, mate. I've got off the thing now. Oh, God. I do want to thank him at the end. What was his name? His name was... I won't say his real name. I've got his real name here. I won't say his real... Reverend Dayglow and the Infrared Necks. Google them. Find out about them. That's another task for you. Find out about this Reverend Dayglow and the Infrared Necks and see what they are. Report back as well. Okay? I'm sure this bloke who's emailed me, he's going to get very excited about this. Apparently, he's got a large collection of Frank Zappa bootlegs. He says it's impressive. Of course, I have to take his word for it. And he said that he believes that these guys are often funny, but in this case, it wasn't funny. It was just mean. You've been mean, guys. I've got some... Oh, I'm done now. I'm going. See you on the next video.